somebody's doing dishes.
Okay. All right, so it looks like we've got people in the room. We may have a few people joining as we go, and that's fine. But I wanted to get started because we have an hour together today. So hello, everyone, and welcome to Classes Without Quizzes as part of Westminster Weekend-ish 2020. We are so excited to have you all here tonight. So I'm Cheyenne Gray. I'm the Manager of Advancement Events here at Westminster. I'm also an alum, class of 2015, and we're going to get started very shortly. But real quick, before we begin, I just wanted to take a moment to let you all know about the upcoming events for the remainder of Westminster Weekend. So tomorrow at 5:30, we'll be joined by chemistry professor Robin Hyde for Science at Home, where you will learn to do a science experiment with household materials. And this activity is especially great for kids, if you have kids involved. And then on Friday at 5:30, we'll have art professor Matt Kruback leading us in a guided paint night, where you can unleash your inner Bob Ross, and it's going to be a lot of fun. And then finally, this Saturday, Westminster is holding the graduation celebration for the class of 2020, and members of the campus community are invited to participate in this socially distant celebration and cheer on the newest members of the alumni community. So information and registration for all of these events can be found on our website at westminstercollege.edu/weekend, and I will put that link in the chat for everyone. And now I would like to give a brief introduction to our presenter for tonight's class, Dr. Beth Dobkin, the 19th president of Westminster College. Dr. Dobkin was appointed president on July 1st, 2018, after more than 30 years of teaching and administrative work in higher education. During Dr. Dobkin's first year as president, Westminster achieved national recognition for the successful career outcomes of its students, for the college's work on sustainability and support for first-generation students, and as a leader in promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion. Prior to her presidency, Dr. Dobkin served as provost and vice president for academic affairs of St. Mary's College of California. And before joining St. Mary's College, Dr. Dobkin spent nearly 2 decades as a teacher and administrator at the University of San Diego. President Dobkin has a PhD in rhetoric and social order, and her publications span academic journals, widely used textbooks, and popular editorials on politics, journalism, and communication. So tonight's edition of Classes Without Quizzes is entitled, "Did You See That? Understanding Political Violence Through Digital Images." And it's based on one of President Dobkin's most popular classes, Media and Conflict, from her time as a professor. In this class, we'll be exploring how news footage of violence is interpreted by viewers, beginning with President Dobkin's research on the use of video in the 1992 trial of highway patrol officers accused of excessive force in the beating of Rodney King. So President Dobkin, I will hand the mic over to you now, and thank you so much for being here with us tonight.
Thank you. Well, when I was asked to teach a class, I jumped at it without thinking. and then dug into it. This really isn't a recycled class session as I would have done many years ago, but rather a combination of looking back at some of the research that I did and also trying to give you some material to just be provocative and have you think about things perhaps a little differently. So tonight's session, or this afternoon's session, is really more of a tease. And it's very different than a classroom situation, which I would be most comfortable in. But that's true for everybody now, right? As far as those of us who are used to the in-person classes that enable the conversation and deep exploration of an issue. So the only other disclaimer that I'll give for you today is that I'm going to be relying on quite a few video clips, and they're all off YouTube, which means I'll be flipping back and forth to those clips, and there may be an ad or two that sneaks in. I actually have a bit of an objection to that in terms of ethics, to subject you to advertising as a captive audience. I apologize in advance. Hopefully there won't be too many of those that slip in, but sometimes they do. So I'm assuming that most people don't have a lot of familiarity with the Rodney King 1991 video and the subsequent riots that broke out in Los Angeles after the trial and the verdict. Some of you may remember that time, may have lived through it. Others of you may have just heard about it vaguely. So what I'd like to do is start with a very brief video that gives kind of an overview of the situation. So here we go.
Can we all get along? Can we get along?
I'm going to stop for a moment. I'm hoping that my audio is coming through when I stop. Is that, yes, okay. I apologize because I should have warned you in advance that you will see video that is likely to be disturbing, because this was the actual video taken of the beating of Rodney King. It is grainy. It is black and white. It is not nearly as high definition as we get nowadays, but nonetheless, I think you may find it disturbing. So there will be a couple of times that we'll be looking at it, and I just thought that it would be a good idea for me to give you that little heads up.
Can we all get along?
First of all, I was thinking about him. You know, what could he have done to deserve that? I didn't see the very beginning of it. I thought maybe he tried to hit a policeman or something. What could he have done to deserve that?
The jury, in the above entitled action, find the defendant, Lawrence M. Powell, not guilty of the crime of assault by force likely to produce great bodily injury and with a deadly weapon.
What does this verdict show in your view?
Racism, and also it shows me the fact that the police can get away with anything.
Where I feel we have no way to event our frustration out, because we're already at the bottom. You know, what else can we do? None but violence.
Can we all get along? Can we get along?
Going to jail back and forth. I mean, killing.
Okay. That gives you kind of an overview of the video, the public perception, the riots that followed. Extremely destructive. There are a lot of other incidents. I mean, I don't want to go into what happened with the riots and the people who were killed, but there was lots of news coverage of that. What struck me back in the early 90s when this happened, and I was an assistant professor at the University of San Diego at the time, was something that drives a lot of my research. How can there be this dissonance between what people are seeing as evidence of something that then goes completely differently in a trial? Because the video itself led most people to assume that this was excessive use of force. Most people saw about 20 seconds of that video. It played repeatedly on newscasts. It was first on KTLA, then it went to CNN, then it aired on all the major networks. And let me show you, I want to show you a bit more of that video, about 3 minutes worth. Like I said, there's 20 seconds, but the whole video was shown in court. And so I want to go to that now and give you a fuller sense of how this played out.
And he took out his new video camera to shoot the event. The full videotape, not just the short snippets aired on the news, is played in court. Parts of it, such as...
actually the end. So I thought I had this queued up better, but I don't, so I apologize. Let's see if I can get a little bit more.
Took out his new video camera to shoot the event.
Okay, so maybe I'll skip it. But I don't want to, so hold on. This is getting to the end, and I want to make sure that.
His first witness, the prosecution calls the man who videotaped the beating.
Sorry, my name is George William Holliday.
Without George Holliday, these 4 officers might not be on trial.
Yeah.
Just the short snippets aired on the news is played in court. Parts of it, such as when King rushes at the officers, are blurred.
Okay, I think that's about where I picked it up, so I apologize for having to go back. It's important, though, that you see that video, because every action that was taken will be dissected in the courtroom. What most people saw, as you probably saw there, was what was referred to in court as a torrent of blows. You see kicking to the head. You see King moving, and how those movements are interpreted becomes critical in the courtroom. The reason that this was interesting to me, not just because of that, you know, in looking at this, is 92% of people who viewed that thought that excessive force had been used. But visual images cue particular feelings and beliefs, and that depends on the context in which you're watching them, and it also depends on the experience that you are bringing to what you are seeing. And so that's part of what I want to talk tonight about this afternoon or evening, is what does it mean to see something in a journalistic context versus a jurisprudence one, for instance. If you associate police with order, safety, and security in particular, then this is shocking. The courtroom setting helps to place the video in that context of law and order. And you have witnesses who can professionalize what the police are doing. The jury location was moved to Simi Valley from South Central LA. The jury was mostly white. And they were really primed to see this video in ways that might fit with their preconceived images and ideas about both law and order and the common cultural associations that we have about Black men. So those are the 2 things that I really want to spend a little bit of time with. The cultural associations that we in this country have about Black men are pervasive. I want to show just a little bit of Tim Wise, who's written extensively on this, and how he describes those associations.
Frank Rich, who, again, is a fairly liberal columnist, and wrote a piece, I think it was in the New York Times, right after or right before the election, where he said that, basically racism is not a problem anymore because when white folks get to know black folks, well, their biases and their fears subside. Now, number one, I'm not sure that's true. But secondly, even if it were true, the truth is, given the history of racism, spatial segregation, residential isolation, the fact that 85% of white folks live in communities with virtually no people of color around, even if he were right, it wouldn't matter because most white folks won't get that opportunity to actually form close, intimate friendships or connections with people of color. And unfortunately, if it isn't happening, the only way we get to know folks of color is via media. So maybe we see Barack Obama on television coming into our living rooms every night. And over an 18-month to 2-year period, we're able to say, yeah, I sort of like that guy. He seems really capable and really bright. Maybe I wasn't sure at first, but given 2 years, he was able to overcome, maybe my first impression. But the only other folks we're seeing in the media are either folks who are sort of superstars on the one hand, or criminals on the other hand. Those are the black folks we typically see on TV. They're either like mega millionaire athletes or entertainers, or they're the folks doing a perp walk on the 6 o'clock news that the cops have just gone arrested and haven't even let them put a shirt on before cuffing them and bringing them out in front of the cameras. If the only people you see regularly are superstar millionaires and thugs, for the average person, they can't relate to either of those, right? The average person of color can't, and the average white person can't either. The superstar, you're likely to envy their position, and the thug you're afraid of. And envy and fear are not particularly good human emotions upon which to base some personal connections or intimate relationships. So I think that's what we're dealing with. Barack Obama or Bill Cosby or Oprah Winfrey or a handful of people of color, we're able to get to know them, or at least we think we know them, via media.
And never mind that this was before we knew a bit more about Bill Cosby. He can now go on the other, away from the superstar status, I'm sure. But the point, I think, is well made, which is why I wanted to include that clip of Tim Wise. We live in segregated communities. We don't often get exposed to people who have identities that are much different than our own. And so we base those associations on what we see in media. And for Black men, they are criminalized or they are sensationalized. They are seen as highly sexual, having a lot of strength. These are the stereotypes that pervade our media. And so it would make sense that we associate an image with a particular stereotype that we have learned to understand. Now, one of the theories that talks about these associations that our brains make is the implicit association. And one of the tools that's been used for a long time to kind of see what associations we make is called the implicit association test. And I'm not going to ask you to take that test now, but I'm going to give you a little bit more information about it should you want to. What it will talk about is the fact that our brains rely on association to make sense of the world. We have to categorize stimuli without having to think about them. That enables us to move through the world. It is just part of the way that brains normally function. So we know that flames are hot, that some food we associate with sweet and others we associate with salty. These brain associations also apply to people and to stereotypes, and they often operate at a level that's below our conscious awareness. Nowadays, we tend to call that implicit bias. There's lots of ways you can reveal implicit associations, but I want you to take just a few minutes to understand the implicit association test as one way that we learn about how to make cultural associations, because I think it's something that influences how we see videos of people that we're not familiar with. So I'm now going to go to the implicit association test.
Test, the IAT, which is now the most popular tool for measuring implicit bias. Just to be clear, the test itself, a reaction time measure, isn't the same thing as the underlying construct, implicit bias. It's just a quick and dirty measurement device. The best way to understand the IAT is to take a test yourself, which you can do easily and anonymously at Project Implicit. For now, I'll offer a quick synopsis. Understanding the IAT, and indeed all reaction time measures, begins with a basic insight. It's always easier for our brains to sort two concepts together if they are closely associated in our minds. For example, if I say the word dog and ask you to complete this word, you'll be quicker to think cat than bat. Or if I say the word doctor, you will be quicker to think nurse than purse. Armed with this insight, scientists created the IAT, which measures how quickly we sort various pictures and words flash on a computer screen together. Our sorting speed reflects how tightly we associate any two concepts. Quicker sorting means stronger association. The black-white race attitude test, for example, compares implicit attitudes toward two racial categories, black folks and white folks. Each racial category is represented by cropped photos of male faces. To begin, you're asked to sort the faces as quickly as possible. If you see a white face, hit a key to your left. If you see a black face, hit a key to your right. Next, you sort words that represent two attitudinal categories, good and bad. When you see a good word such as beauty, hit a key to your left. When you see a bad word such as filth, hit a key to your right. Now the real challenge starts. You're instructed to sort both photos and words, whatever flashes on the screen. For some runs, you are instructed to press the same key for white faces and good words, say on your left, and a different same key for black faces and bad words, say on your right. If you have a more positive association with white folks as compared to black folks, then in this particular arrangement, you will find your groove and fly through the test. Most of us do. But on other runs, which are randomized and counterbalanced, the IAT will give you different directions. Press the same key for white faces and bad words, and another same key for black faces and good words. In these runs, most players can't quite get into a groove, take longer to respond, and make more mistakes by hitting the wrong key. The average time differential between the two arrangements, white plus good as compared to black plus good, is called the IAT effect and reflects the strength of an attitude. On average, we might be a fraction of a second faster pairing white faces with good words than black faces with good words. This means that on average, we have an implicit preference for whites. Over nearly 2 decades, millions of people have taken implicit association tests hosted by Project Implicit. These tests have measured everything from racial attitudes to gender associations to preferences for one political candidate over another. The results are overwhelming. Implicit biases, measured by reaction times, are systematic and pervasive. They are statistically significant, which means they are not due to chance. On average, our implicit attitudes, which, to remind you, are overall valences toward a category, predictably favor certain groups over others. 80% of participants prefer young over old, 69% thin over overweight, 68% white over black, 76% able-bodied over disabled. Our implicit stereotypes, which are specific trait associations, are also predictable. 72% of participants associate blacks with weapons as opposed to harmless objects. 61% associate Asians with the foreign as opposed to American. 72% associate women with humanities as opposed to math. 76% associate women with family as opposed to career. Pervasiveness does not mean that every single person has the exact same amount of bias. There's wide variability across individuals and groups. For instance, most whites have an implicit preference for whites over blacks, but African Americans show no preference on average. But there's a natural bell curve around that zero average, with about 1/3 of African Americans also showing an implicit attitude in favor of whites over blacks. Unfortunately, no one is immune. But this doesn't mean that we're powerless. To learn more, watch my final video.
Okay. So one of the reasons that I wanted to show you that video is because there is a lot of talk nowadays about implicit bias and systemic racism. And we tend to personalize things without stepping back and saying, this is part of the air we breathe, the water around us, whatever metaphor you want to use. It's part of all the cultural imagery and artifacts, and it becomes very difficult to escape. And I want to suggest to you that it also influences how we view things, like what seems to be a clear-cut piece of evidence that's shown in a visual image. So now let's go back to that courtroom. for the beating. And I want to show you a little bit about how we moved from newscast to courtroom and how common associations were cued in the courtroom. Let me see if I can, I want to start with Sergeant Stacy Kuhn and some of the ways that he describes what was going on and how we shift to his perspective in looking at the videos. Back to Court TV.
Stacy, STAC, is Charles.
Kuhn, a 14-year police veteran, is accused by the state of supervising the beating of Rodney King.
And you said that you observed him to be buffed out. Would you please describe to the jury what buffed out means to you?
Buffed out is jargon that I've come to associate with very muscular. In other words, an individual that is very pumped up as far as muscles.
And does that have some significance to you?
Yes, it does.
And what is that significance?
That question regarding
The buffed out. Yes, Your Honor. With regard to your state of mind, what were you thinking when you saw this buffed out person?
My initial response is that he was probably an ex-con. The CHP officer, Melanie Singer, began approaching the suspect with a gun.
All right, let me go forward a bit.
No, he grimaced. He kind of gave out like a bear-like yell.
And what did he do then?
He continued to rise. He got up to his knees and he began to turn 180 degrees toward me then.
And what happened then?
I ordered him again to lay down, to get down.
And what did he do?
He continued to rise. He came up, he continued to rise to his feet, and I tased him a second time.
And what did he do after you tased him the second time?
He repeated this this groan, similar to like a wounded animal, and then he, I could see the vibrations on him, but he seemed to be overcoming it.
Sergeant.
So I'm hoping that I'm going to do a couple more clips, and I do want to save time for you to ask questions after we watch some of this, but I'm hoping that you can hear those cultural associations, the groans, the bear-like comment, the wounded animal, he's overcoming vibrations. So Sergeant Kuhn is basically telling us that he is fearful for his life, that that King is in control of this situation, because in moving from a prone position to pulling his knees under him, and we'll see how that's described in a minute, that is seen as an act of aggression because he is now rising, right? That's how this was described in the courtroom. They bring in a police expert to help validate this particular way to talk about the violence being escalated by King himself.
Sergeant Kuhn, at this point in time, this incident has just gone on several seconds. Is that correct?
It's gone on, it seems like an attorney, but it's gone on several seconds, yes.
All right. And Mr. King has been hit several times?
He's been hit a lot of times.
And at this point, do you believe he's trying to get up?
Yes, I do.
And what did you think he was trying to get up to do?
He was going to get up and arm himself and possibly attack Officer Wind here in the background, Officer Powell, Officer Brasino.
During this entire incident, do you believe that you were in charge of your officers?
Yes, I was in charge of my officers.
I'm going to keep going.
By Rodney King.
What did Mr. King do based upon your perception?
Mr. King came.
Okay, this is the police expert. All right, so you saw how Sergeant Kuhn is saying that King's a threat when he's lying on the ground because he's going to get up and attack the officers, right?
From a outstretched prone position, raised up and turned and what appeared to run or charge at an officer.
All right, sir. And in this particular set of circumstances, is a baton an appropriate weapon to use to stop that advance or escape?
Yes, it is.
Right. When he is in this position here at 336.19, would it be appropriate to hit Mr. King with a baton?
He's in a rising position. He has this leg is cocked. He's up on his knees or up on his elbows in a rising position.
Right, so you're saying based upon all that has happened up to date with regard to this scenario, you think it would be appropriate to hit him?
Yes, I do, because once an officer is attacked, to allow the suspect to rise to his feet, you allow the potential for escalating the situation into a deadly force mode. The suspect has his hand in a flat, the hand portion of the hand is flat on the ground. The arm appears to be cocked. This leg, which would be his left leg, appears to be bent, coming up in a position in he is in a what appears to be a rocking position.
I'm going to do one more clip, and I hope that you're catching some of the language that we're using to describe, again, King's body as a weapon. Let's do one more from this expert on use of force.
This is still an aggressive position in your mind, is that correct?
Yes, according to your spectrum, it is, yes.
Well, according to your perception, it's an aggressive position.
Yes, on the guide of your perspective, spectrum, yes, it's both.
All right. Still aggressive enough in your mind to justify the continued use of this deadly weapon?
Yes.
What movement have you seen by Mr. King at this time?
He had his knee in a cocked position and a baton blow struck and it straightened it out.
The baton blow straightened out his leg?
It caused him to move his leg straight, in a straight position.
What do you think it caused it to move it in that straight position, from pain?
I don't know.
Does Mr. King need to be unconscious for you to say he's not aggressive?
No.
So just from the little pieces that I've given you, the defense representing the officers was able to establish that the police were scared of an aggressive, superhuman black man who was entirely in control of his own beating. And that King himself created an escalation dynamic to which the police were responding out of fear. So when you contextualize the video in this way and punctuate it, meaning you choose when to stop and start, and you then describe the actions in a way that lends a different interpretation, of course, the jury saw something very different than everyone outside the courtroom. Now, I said a little bit about implicit associations, managing how we deal with competing stimuli, but when the situation is one of life and death, it's worth pausing to consider what we're seeing and how those assumptions might be failing us. I apologize for the barking dog. Tim Weiss talked about learning, about how important it is to learn from others and break down those simplistic associations. It's one of the best ways that you can get beyond this very almost caricature of a person. I wouldn't say almost, is a caricature of a person. And so one of the things I wanted to offer to you as an antidote to that was just a few comments from some young black men about their experiences growing up. We do live in segregated communities. We don't often get the opportunity to learn from others unless we go out and seek them. So let me go to that. And then we're almost to the point where I want to open up the chat. So. You don't want those.
As they do. So you have to be aware and you have to watch out and you can't mess up.
This was an extremely emotionally taxing process for me in terms of coming to terms with.
Verizon knows how to build unlimited right. Start with America's most awarded network. Include the best in entertainment and offer plans to mix and match starting at $35. Plus, get the Samsung Galaxy S25G UW on us when you buy any Note 25G. Only at Verizon.
Maybe the nature of racism in my own life and in this country and in this world. And if you wait until somebody's 12, 13, and 14 to put that on them, it can be really difficult.
My dad, he's just like the honest one. He's like, listen, son, like there are things in this world, like you kind of have to watch out. He doesn't want me to live in fear, but he wants me to be aware.
I want people to know that I'm perfectly fine and I'm not gonna hurt anybody or do anything bad. I should be judged about like who I am and like and what kind of person I am.
My parents would tell me, especially my mom, she would tell me, you have to endure, you have to muscle through it. And this is no different. It's a part of being a person of color in America.
And there's a certain comfortability associated with that, because if I know that something is inevitable, then I know how to deal with it. Fortunately, I've had parents who have said, this is what you do.
Mom and Dad, I'll be fine because you did a good job raising me. You gave me all the resources and the time and the blood, sweat, and tears to make me a good man, an honorable man, and the foundation to survive in this country.
I want you to know that I will act in an appropriate manner and do everything that you told me to do, because I do love you. And I know that everything you say is not for a reason and not just to talk. And I love you.
I thought it was important to close with that, to humanize and to bring perspective to things that are very ugly and brutal, and to remind us that video evidence isn't always as clear as we think it is. We don't all see the same things. We come to images based on our personal experience, our implicit associations, and the context in which we are viewing those images. So if we want to see clearly and truly understand, we have to train our brains to understand multiple people and perspectives. And sometimes that means opening your minds and your hearts. I have more that I can say about this, but I want to pause and give people a chance to ask questions and explore the topic a little bit more. And I'm reading some of the chats now. Thanks to Vicky. Very, very difficult.
You know, if I can say, I think it's really interesting because so I graduated Moore Park High School, which is right next to Simi Valley. So in Los Angeles, we're so, where most of my relatives worked. And it's interesting to me because the Rodney King and the Reginald Deming, that is just so closely embedded in my heart. And that happened about the same time. I was the same 91 graduating high school, 92 my first year of college. So I feel now, fast forward, oh my gosh, are we 30 years now? And the things that are happening today and what today's college students, I mean, I was their age experiencing the things that are happening now, and they're very similar. And yet Rodney King was more impactful for me than what I'm seeing right now, because it's very familiar, unfortunately. And I'm sure today's college students will remember the names of those that are facing the same injustices, I think, happening right now. And it's sad we haven't really moved very forward in the last 30 years.
Yeah, I'll in a couple minutes show you kind of just a little clip of connecting the two events or bringing us up to speed. But just answering Ashley's question about discussion during the trial about how many officers were on the scene. Yes, there was discussion. It's why the question was asked of Sergeant Kuhn about whether he was in control of his officers. They talk about rushing early on when King was pulled over. I don't know that I'd call it rushing. He started to approach a female CHP officer who pulled out her gun, and they said, no, back down. So she put her gun away, and then they all, then a group of them jumped on King and started the beating. they were retried later, and 2 of them did face charges for civil rights violations. There were some other evidence that came out about the language they were using about King that supported this notion that there was really more going on there than just the attempt to stop or control him. Yeah, there were more than 4 officers, but you know, the threat, I really think it's worth thinking about our cultural imagery and how we respond at a very visceral level to what our country has done in defining Blackness. It is not healthy, it is not appropriate, and it can be life or death for some people.
Beth, this is Byron McCann. You know, this really wonderful presentation really was very striking and provocative, so thank you. You know, my mind goes to where's the point of the spear and how we, you know, promote change. And clearly, as a culture, it's going to take a long time to overcome implicit bias. But it seems like in these incendiary cases that prop up and stimulate a lot of, you know, response, it seems like the defense attorneys are utterly incapable of dissecting, you know, implicit bias and how the defense or the, you know, the other side is, the prosecution is leveraging all this BS. When I saw that courtroom, it was just like, are you kidding me? They're totally manipulating the reality of the interpretation. I mean, his knee was bent, and then we hit it and it straightened up. Well, what does that have to do with anything? You know, so where were the objections coming from? So anyway, it seems like, you know, we've got a lot of work to do across our whole culture for a lot of time. But I think what it seems like we need to do is get the defense attorneys educated on implicit bias as a start.
Yeah, one of the reasons that I got involved in this work, I was actually doing some consulting with attorneys about how to create, how to unpack narratives, right? Because ultimately that's what they are doing. They are creating an alternate narrative for what happened. And particularly now, it's one of the reasons that I keep pushing digital fluency and understanding how to read images critically, because you need to approach these, and our attorneys don't always know this, but I think it's something that we do pretty well at Westminster. It's why I'm here, right? Because having those skills to be able to see the different possibilities of interpretation. I mean, I love Cheyenne's discussion of the body cam videos. I mean, it's not enough. It's not enough to have an image, right? You have to go beyond that and think about what's being brought to the image, how it's being punctuated. That's one of my favorite words when you come to narratives. We think about punctuation as something that happens in grammar. Well, actually, it tells you when to start a story and when to stop a story. And where you choose to start it and stop it can be critical in your understanding of what actually happened. It also gets trivialized, something that I wanted to show. I'm just going to switch. This will probably be the last time I share my screen, but I thought this was kind of interesting. And then I'll go to the back to the chat. So if you go to, and I'm gonna, if I can get rid of that, I will do the view of the slides. Okay, so if you just look at this for a moment, the quote from Rodney King is all over, right? Why can't we all just get along? And that's why it's even used as that meme in the opening video. And then you have, referring to George Floyd, this really striking image of a Marine protesting with the "I can't breathe," right? To me, these are both, they've become cultural memes. Why can't we all just get along? And "I can't breathe," right? But interestingly, this is just from yesterday, the Salt Lake Tribune uses the Rodney King quote, I mean, not Salt Lake Magazine, to talk about our lights on the athletic field. Because we have neighbors who have complained about the fact that we now put up lights. So we use that quote from Rodney King, "Can't we all just get along?" And then I'm sure you know about the mask incident where we have some protesters saying, "I can't breathe because of wearing a mask, so I'm not going to wear a mask." In my mind, both of these things trivialize the very importance of the incidents. And the more that we trivialize and brush past them and become desensitized, the less likely we are to get in underneath the issues that cause things like riots in the first place. Yeah, Jared's comments, absolutely. Those kinds of things are part of what feeds into the interpretations. Thank you for that one. The use of police force expert. And you're not going to find an expert to testify on behalf of what Rodney King was experiencing, right? Maggie. I don't know. I don't know that. I mean, the intentional. I don't assume intentionality. It's one of the things I try to avoid doing. So I don't know.
Beth, is there longitudinal research or data around implicit bias and how it has evolved over time based on some of these circumstantial moments that would help to shed light on perhaps ways where we can, you know, I mean, oh God, this is so hard to talk about, where we can stop or at least find ways to kind of combat the trends that we see, where we can combat the polarization of everything that's taking place. Do we have any kind of longitudinal research where we can look to see positive trends that can help to inform us?
Well, that's tough. I don't know about positive trends, but I know that for instance, we had Jennifer Eberhardt on campus about a year ago. I think she wrote the book called Biased. That's one of the resources that I would suggest for you. So if you want to pursue the topic a bit more on your own, the three things that I would suggest are Biased by Jennifer Eberhardt. I found Malcolm Gladwell's most recent book, Talking to Strangers, to be quite good as well, and unpacking how we make assumptions in these situations, and it's just fascinating book. And then National Geographic, if you want to know more about LA in '92, National Geographic has a documentary called LA '92, which is very good. Now, the reason I brought up Jennifer Eberhardt is because she talks about policing. And if you remember that implicit attitude or association test, there was an association of race based with whether someone was holding a weapon or not. And what she's been able to do is influence some of the police training that goes on to help overcome that, because many of us, it's not just officers, it's part of this cultural imagery, particularly when we're in a situation that invokes fear or stress, are more likely to see an object in the hand of a black person being a weapon than an object in the hand of a white person. And so some of her research and some of these and others who've done research on implicit association are using this to help train in a way that overcomes some of those implicit associations that we might have. So I wouldn't say that's trend research necessarily. I don't think there's enough of that kind of training done to be able to show a trend yet, but there are promising moments and things that we can do, that we can learn to do to help keep people safe.
I appreciate that background. I'll certainly look at that book. I'm gonna go ahead and grab that. I guess one of the things that was very telling to me, and I'm sad to admit is not necessarily surprising, is when that video walked through the statistic that even Black Americans, 1/3 roughly view, have implicit bias that hold white Americans in higher, in a higher view than themselves. I'm curious if that's changing in any way. I'm curious if, implicit biases held by white Americans are changing anyway. I would be very interested to see what the research shows as time goes by. So I'll look into some of that. Thank you.
Yeah, if you go to Project Implicit, they've been running those tests for at least 20 years. I used to use them in class 15 or 20 years ago. And sometimes I'll do it myself just to check my own implicit associations, right? And I don't think that they have said that there's any trend in moving away from them. It's to some extent, it's inescapable. It's part of what our mind is trained to do. So it's knowing that and being sure that we don't act on it that's important to me. because it's going to be there. That's just part of how brains categorize and move through the stimuli that they get. It's part of our cultural imagery, and we've got a long way to go in changing our cultural imagery. There are examples of it. It's great, but 3 steps forward, 2 steps back in general. And thanks to Cheyenne for putting the resources in the chat as well. Yeah, O.J. Simpson verdict, counteract the King verdict. Well, I don't know. Simpson was acquitted, but he was also a superstar. I mean, he fit the celebrity profile, right? That feeds right into those stereotypes that we see in culture all the time.
Hi, this is Beth Thomas Rothwag. I was just wondering, from your perspective, where do you see us 20 years from now? Do you think that we're going to make any progress? Because it seems like this keeps coming up and we're not getting anywhere, and it feels overwhelming and exhausting. And how do we fix this problem?
Yeah, there's a real danger of the overwhelming and the overwhelming and exhausting nature of it just paralyzing people, and that's often what happens, right? It becomes too much, and then we don't do anything. I'd like to be hopeful. We are incredibly polarized. That's an understatement, I'm sure, for a lot of people. Until we find ways to find the common threads of value that connect us, we will not have progress, because polarization keeps the status quo. It's the most conservative force we have, is to have 2 opposing sides that are always shown as equal. You never get anywhere. So it is part of, I think it's incumbent on all of us to try and learn the skills of listening, of empathy, of finding connections between our own experience and those who aren't like us, and seeing where the shared values are, because that's really what's going to help in the long run. That's what's going to change things. As long as we become entrenched in a particular viewpoint, and it's always, the polarization is great for people who have the most resources at their disposal and have the most to gain from things not changing. So we really have to get beyond the polarization. It's not impossible.
Hi, this is Jess Los. I was reading an interesting paper that was talking about crisis intervention training in our police forces, and that's like in response to people who are in mental health crisis, right? We have a bias against individuals who are also experiencing, and a misunderstanding of people who are experiencing some sort of mental health crisis and may respond violently to their irregular actions. And the data seem to indicate that police forces with crisis intervention training didn't necessarily do any better than those who didn't have it. Now, those with crisis intervention training often self-select into that because they might be having more issues to start. And so what I'm interested in is, do you think bias training is enough to respond to this to make an improvement?
Yeah, I'm not an expert on policing or police training. I do know that I've been pretty impressed by some of the research that I've seen around community-oriented policing. There's some police departments vary across the country. Some take a community policing approach. Some are giving training in mental health issues, right? But it is so inconsistent, and we haven't really. As long as we define the problem as one of only police brutality, we're really only speaking to a very small number of police officers, right? And we need to help everybody else with our expectations for policing and how we do it in a way that addresses the problems that they are going to confront with things like mental illness and homelessness and domestic violence and all the everyday things that we really don't talk about, that we don't train, as long as the only model we are using is an escalation of force kind of model. So, I'm not the expert on it, right? But there are some police departments who seem to be doing pretty well in having approaches to policing that is a little more expansive, that gives officers a better range of tools to respond to situations that are deeply problematic. And at some level, it's also incumbent on us to address the situations that lead the police to have to intervene, right? I mean, you start talking about mental illness and homelessness and environmental, I mean, all of this, the complex social problems. If we define them all as policing issues, then we have essentially criminalized people in ways that aren't going to help us solve the problem. Yeah, Stacy's got the 10,000 hours. That's another Malcolm Gladwell. He can be very, very interesting in the way he presents things. If I had another, oh, Cheyenne, if I had another hour, where would I take this conversation next? Oh my goodness. That's a big question. My training was more in, well, I'd probably be going to how news coverage of protests is occurring right now. So we would go to George Floyd, we would go to the other incidents. I do have a clip that actually makes the connection between King and Floyd, and that's where we would go next. We would start talking about what we're seeing, how to understand what we're seeing, how our contemporary news organizations have their own narratives that frame events to help us understand or misunderstand what's going on. So I think that's where I'd go next. Anything else before we wrap up? Not exactly a light afternoon. I apologize for that. I have signed up for painting on Friday. I'm looking forward to that. But you know, this, as I told Maggie before the call, it's all her fault. I gave her a list of topics and she said, do that one, because it probably is one of the ones that's more authentic to the kinds of things that I used to do back when I was in the classroom. And hopefully I'll get to do more classroom kinds of things in the future because I definitely enjoy it. So I want to thank you. I want to thank you all for joining. Cheyenne, is there anything else that we need to accomplish? I think we're coming up on time.
Not tonight. I just want to thank you for joining us tonight and for spending this time and sharing your expertise. And yes, I agree with Stacy. It was wonderful to have you in the classroom environment, even though, of course, we can't be together in a room right now. It's great to get to do it virtually and to have our alumni and campus community join us. So thank you so much, and thank you everyone for being here. And that's it for tonight. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you for joining, and please continue the conversation.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.